Welcome to Holy Cross Cemetery, 200 acres of gently rolling hills in Culver City, California, just a few miles north of Los Angeles International Airport. If you listen carefully, you can hear the jets on their approach, a steady reminder that the modern world is never far away, even in a place as timeless as this one. This is sacred ground. A Catholic cemetery opened in 1939 by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. It was built on land that was once part of the old Rancho La Bolona, a vast Spanish land grant that stretched across the west side of what would become the city of Los Angeles. The landscape here is distinctly Southern California: manicured lawns, old eucalyptus trees, the occasional burst of bougainvillea against a white stone wall. Unlike some of the more theatrical cemeteries in the area, Holy Cross keeps things understated. There are no towering obelisks, no grand mausoleums competing for attention. The Archdiocese requires flat markers, set flush with the grass, which gives the place a quiet uniformity. The famous and the forgotten rest side by side, their markers indistinguishable from a distance. For more than 8 decades, this place has served as the final resting ground for some of the most recognizable names in American entertainment. From the golden age of Hollywood to the era of television, from the operatic stage to the gridiron. Today, we're going to walk these grounds together and visit 50 of the men and women who rest here. Some are names you'll know instantly. Others you may have forgotten. A few you may never have heard of, but their stories are worth telling just the same. Along the way, you'll hear about Oscar winners and one-hit wonders, gossip queens and jazz pioneers, a Gilded Age beauty, and a punk rocker who died at 22. What connects them all is this place, this quiet patch of California earth where their stories ended, and where ours, as visitors, can begin. Let's start our tour near the entrance to the cemetery, where one of the most beloved entertainers in American history is buried. If you grew up hearing a certain warm baritone voice drifting from the radio on Christmas morning, you already know this man. Harry Lillis Crosby Jr., Bing to the world, was for decades the most popular entertainer on Earth. His 1942 recording of Irving Berlin's White Christmas remains to this day the best-selling single ever pressed. But Crosby was far more than one song. He was the first multimedia star, dominant on radio, dominant in film, dominant on records, all at the same time. In 1948, American polls declared him the most admired man alive, ahead of Jackie Robinson and Pope Pius XII. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor playing the easygoing Father O'Malley in Going My Way in 1944. Right here in this cemetery, as it happens, Leo McCarey, who directed that film, also rests, and we'll visit him later. Crosby earned 2 more Oscar nominations for The Bells of St. Mary's and The Country Girl. With Bob Hope, he made the famous Road pictures, 7 films that turned the 2 of them into America's favorite comedy duo. Their chemistry was effortless, built on genuine friendship and a shared gift for improvisation that drove their directors to distraction. What people sometimes forget is that Crosby started as a musician, playing drums and singing in a band with a piano player named Al Rinker, and the 2 of them drove from Spokane, Washington to Los Angeles in 1925 with nothing but talent and nerve. Crosby's relaxed, low-key vocal style changed the way popular music was sung. Before Bing, singers belted to the back row. After Bing, they crooned into a microphone. And Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Perry Como, and every pop singer who followed owed something to what he'd pioneered. He was also an early investor in technology, backing the development of magnetic tape recording, which allowed him to pre-record his radio shows rather than perform them live, a decision that helped launch the entire pre-recorded broadcasting industry. Off the stage and the screen, Crosby was a complicated man. He was deeply devoted to golf, some said more devoted to it than to anything else, and he was a co-owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team. His public image was warm and genial, but his eldest sons later spoke publicly about a much stricter private figure. Crosby died the way he would have wanted, on a golf course. On October 14, 1977, after finishing a round near Madrid, Spain, he collapsed from a heart attack on the way back to the clubhouse. He was 74 years old. His funeral was held here at Holy Cross at 5 a.m, per his wishes. A private affair attended only by family and a handful of close friends, including Bob Hope and Rosemary Clooney. He rests near the entrance to the cemetery, beside his first wife, the actress and singer Dixie Lee, who had died of ovarian cancer in 1952. Two of his sons from that marriage, Dennis and Lindsay, are also buried nearby. Both of them died too young, each taking his own life, years apart. A private sorrow that the Crosby family bore largely in silence. From the Crosby gravesite, let's walk deeper into the cemetery, toward the southwest section and the area known as the Grotto, a striking artificial cave and waterfall built in 1954 by a Japanese-American artist named Ryoso Kado, dedicated to Saint Bernadette. The grotto became the most sought-after burial area in the cemetery, and it is here that many of the biggest names rest. Our first stop in this part of the grounds belongs to the man who defined horror for an entire generation. The irony is almost too perfect to ignore. The actor most famous for playing Count Dracula, a creature repelled by the cross, found his eternal rest at Holy Cross Cemetery. Bela Ferenc Dzoblasko was born in 1882 in the town of Lugos, in what was then the Kingdom of Hungary. He took the stage name Lugosi from his hometown and brought it with him across the Atlantic. Before Hollywood, he was a stage actor in Budapest, a soldier in the First World War. He served as a lieutenant in the Austro-Hungarian infantry and was wounded on the Eastern Front, and a political refugee who fled to Germany and eventually to America after supporting a failed leftist revolution. He performed Dracula on Broadway beginning in 1927, touring the country for years, and audiences found his tall, gaunt figure and heavy Magyar accent irresistible. When Universal Pictures decided to bring the story to the screen, Lugosi was the obvious choice. The 1931 film made him immortal, and it trapped him. He turned down the role of Frankenstein's monster, reportedly because the heavy makeup would make him unrecognizable, and the part went to Boris Karloff, who became the bigger star. Lugosi was so identified with Dracula that other quality roles dried up. By the 1940s, he was making low-budget horror pictures and struggling with an addiction to morphine that had begun after treatment for sciatic pain. In 1955, he voluntarily checked himself into a state hospital for treatment, and the press covered it like a circus. His final years were spent working with Ed Wood, the director often called the worst in Hollywood history. And Lugosi died while Wood's cult film Plan 9 from Outer Space was still in production. Footage of Lugosi from unfinished projects was spliced into the film after his death. Lugosi passed away from a heart attack on August 16, 1956, at 73. At the request of his fifth wife, Hope, and his son, Bela Jr., he was buried wearing one of his Dracula capes. It was a fitting final gesture for a man who could never escape the role. About 60 mourners attended, including Ed Wood himself. Frank Sinatra, who had a soft spot for performers down on their luck, quietly helped cover the funeral costs. His grave is in the grotto section, a flat marker, as is the custom here at Holy Cross. Not far from Lugosi, in this same coveted section near the grotto, rests a woman whose name was once synonymous with glamour itself. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in Brooklyn in 1918, she was the daughter of a Spanish vaudeville dancer named Eduardo Cancino and a Ziegfeld chorus girl named Volga Hayworth. By the time Hollywood was done with her, she had a new name, Rita Hayworth, a new hairline, raised by painful electrolysis to give her a higher forehead, and a career that made her the biggest female star of the 1940s. Her father had put her on stage as his dance partner when she was just 12, performing in Tijuana nightclubs in a routine that drew uncomfortable attention. When Columbia Pictures signed her, studio head Harry Cohn remade her image entirely, changing her name, her hair color, her look. She danced with Fred Astaire in You'll Never Get Rich and You Were Never Lovelier, and opposite Gene Kelly in CoverGirl. But it was Gilda in 1946 that made her a legend. That film, and the iconic image of Hayworth peeling off a long black glove while singing Put the Blame on Mame, turned her into a global symbol of allure. The image was so famous that it was reportedly stenciled onto the atomic bomb tested at Bikini Atoll, a distinction Hayworth found appalling, not flattering. During the war, her pinup photograph was carried by GIs from the South Pacific to Normandy. She was married 5 times, to men who ranged from a controlling older businessman to Orson Welles, who directed her in The Brilliant and Strange Lady from Shanghai, to Prince Ali Khan, the son of the Aga Khan. She once said, in a line that has echoed through the decades, "They go to bed with Gilda, they wake up with me." It was a remark that captured the distance between the screen goddess and the shy, insecure woman behind her. Hayworth's later years were marked by confusion and erratic behavior that the public and the press attributed to alcohol. In truth, she was suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's disease, diagnosed around 1980. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, became one of the first public advocates for Alzheimer's research, and Hayworth's illness helped bring the disease out of the shadows at a time when it was poorly understood. The Rita Hayworth Gala has raised tens of millions of dollars for the cause since it began in 1985. Hayworth died on May 14, 1987, at 68, in her Manhattan apartment. Her funeral was held at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, and her pallbearers included Ricardo Montalban and Glenn Ford. She was laid to rest here at Holy Cross. Speaking of Ricardo Montalban, he rests here too, and his grave is our next stop. For a certain generation, he will always be the white-suited Mr. Rourke, the suave and slightly mysterious host of Fantasy Island, greeting guests each week with that resonant accented voice, "Welcome to Fantasy Island." For another, he is Khan Noonien Singh, the genetically engineered villain who made Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, one of the most acclaimed science fiction films ever made, a performance of such operatic intensity that it elevated the entire franchise. But Montalban's career was far broader and deeper than those 2 roles suggest. Born in Mexico City in 1920, the youngest of 4 children of Spanish immigrants from Castile, he came to Hollywood in the 1940s and was promptly cast in MGM musicals opposite Esther Williams. The studio saw him as decorative, the handsome Latin in the swimming pool, and he chafed at the limitations. He fought for decades against the typecasting and restricted roles offered to Latino actors in an industry that saw them primarily as bandits, lovers, or exotic scenery. In 1970, he founded Nosotros, the Spanish word for us, an organization devoted to improving the representation of Hispanics in the entertainment industry. It was a cause he pursued with quiet persistence for the rest of his life. He won an Emmy Award in 1978 for the miniseries How the West Was Won, and he received nominations for several other roles over the years. He also became one of the great commercial pitchmen of his era. Who among us of a certain age can forget him purring about the soft Corinthian leather of the Chrysler Cordoba? The phrase became so famous that it entered the culture as a punchline, but Montalban delivered it with such genuine relish that it sold cars by the thousands. An injury sustained during the filming of Across the Wide Missouri in 1951 left him with a spinal condition that worsened over the years, and by the 1990s he was confined to a wheelchair, though he continued to work, lending his voice to animated projects and making occasional appearances. Montalban died at his Los Angeles home on January 14, 2009, at 88. He remained a Mexican citizen his entire life, a point of pride for a man who had spent half a century in Hollywood without ever forgetting where he came from. Let's continue along the pathways near the grotto. Just a short walk from Montalban, we come to one of the more poignant stories in this cemetery, and one of the most tragic in Hollywood history. Sharon Marie Tate was 26 years old, 8.5 months pregnant, and on the verge of genuine stardom when members of the Manson family murdered her and 4 others at her rented home on Cielo Drive in the hills above Los Angeles on the night of August 8, 1969. The other victims that night were Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Perront, names that became forever linked with one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Tate had appeared in Valley of the Dolls, in The Wrecking Crew with Dean Martin, and in The Fearless Vampire Killers, directed by her husband, Roman Polanski. Critics had noted her comedic timing and dramatic range, and friends believed she was on the cusp of the kind of career that would have made her a major star. Polanski was in Europe at the time of the murders, working on a film. The crime shattered the California dream of the 1960s. The Manson trial that followed was a national nightmare that dragged on for months. But the story of Sharon Tate did not end with her death. Her mother, Doris Tate, channeled her grief into something extraordinary. She became a pioneering victims' rights activist, fighting for changes to California law that would give crime victims and their families a voice at parole hearings. Before Doris Tate, victims had no legal right to speak when their attackers came up for parole. She changed that, and the legislation she helped pass has been adopted in some form by states across the country. The funeral was held in the chapel here at Holy Cross, attended by Warren Beatty, Kirk Douglas, Peter Sellers, and other friends and colleagues. Doris Tate is buried here alongside her daughter. Sharon's unborn son, named Paul Richard Polanski on the marker, rests with her. The Tate family plot is a quiet, unassuming spot. No monument, just flat markers, the same as every other grave in this cemetery. Visitors still come regularly, leaving flowers and tokens of remembrance. It remains one of the most visited sites at Holy Cross, a place where people come not out of morbid curiosity but out of genuine sorrow for a life cut short. Moving away from the grotto area for a moment, let's walk toward a different section of the cemetery, where a very different kind of star is buried. One whose fame was built not on glamour, but on laughter. If you were watching movies in the 1980s and early 1990s, there were few faces that made you happier to see than John Candy's. Born on Halloween in 1950 in Newmarket, Ontario, Candy grew up in a working-class family shaped by loss. His father, Sidney, died of a heart attack at just 35 when John was only 4 years old. That family history of heart disease would shadow him for the rest of his life. Raised by his mother and grandparents, Candy discovered comedy as a teenager and studied journalism at Centennial College in Toronto before dropping out to pursue acting. He first gained fame as a member of the SCTV comedy troupe, the Canadian sketch show that rivaled Saturday Night Live in the late 1970s and early 1980s. On SCTV, Candy created unforgettable characters like Johnny LaRue, the boozy, cigar-chomping television host, and the polka-obsessed Yosh Schmenge of the Schmenge brothers. He could play bluster and vulnerability in the same breath, often in the same scene, and that gift made him irresistible. Hollywood soon came calling, and he delivered one memorable performance after another. The lovable oaf ox in Stripes, Tom Hanks's oversized brother in Splash, the chatty shower curtain ring salesman Del Griffith in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. A performance so warm and vulnerable that it still makes people cry after dozens of viewings. Steve Martin, his co-star in that film, later said that no one could play someone desperate for friendship the way Candy could. He was Uncle Buck, the unlikely hero of Cool Runnings, and the unforgettable Gus Polinski, the polka king of the Midwest, in Home Alone. Behind the comedy, Candy struggled with anxiety, weight, and the knowledge that heart disease ran deep in his family. Friends recalled a man who was generous to a fault, who remembered every crew member's name, and who worried constantly about his health, even as his weight continued to climb. On March 4, 1994, he was in Durango, Mexico, filming the Western comedy Wagons East. He had finished his scenes for the day, called his co-stars to celebrate what he felt was some of his best work, and went to bed. He never woke up. He died of a heart attack in his sleep at 43, almost the same age his father had been. The film industry mourned him as one of the funniest and kindest people it had ever produced. His funeral at Holy Cross was a private affair, attended by Dan Aykroyd, Jim Belushi, and other close friends. Let's take a turn now from comedy to classic Hollywood and walk to a section of the cemetery where two men who shared a screen in one of the most beloved films ever made now share these grounds, though they rest in separate spots. If you know The Wizard of Oz, you know Ray Bolger. He was the Scarecrow, loose-limbed, floppy, and utterly endearing, singing "If I Only Had a Brain" as he danced down the yellow brick road. Bulger was a dancer first and always, one of the most inventive physical performers of his generation. He had started in vaudeville and made it to Broadway, where he created the role of Sapphire in On Your Toes in 1936, performing the famous Slaughter on 10th Avenue ballet. Hollywood used him frequently, but it was the scarecrow that defined him, and he embraced it. What many people don't realize is that Bulger was originally cast as the Tin Man. He lobbied hard to switch to the Scarecrow, a role that better suited his elastic physicality. He continued performing into his 70s, and he and his wife Gwendolyn were married for 63 years, one of Hollywood's longest unions. Bulger died of bladder cancer on January 15, 1987, at 83. And then there's the man who ended up playing the Tin Man after Bulger swapped roles. Jack Haley, a song and dance man from Boston, stepped into the role of the Tin Woodman on The Wizard of Oz and created one of cinema's most touching performances, singing "If I Only Had a Heart," with a sincerity that transcended the tin makeup. But Haley actually wasn't the first Tin Man either. The role had originally been given to Buddy Ebsen, who suffered a severe allergic reaction to the aluminum dust in the original makeup and had to be hospitalized. Haley took over, and the rest is movie history. Outside of Oz, Haley had a long career in musical comedies and on television, and his son, Jack Haley Jr., became a well-known director and producer who married Liza Minnelli, herself the daughter of Oz's Dorothy, Judy Garland. Jack Haley Sr. died of a heart attack on June 6, 1979, at 80. His son Jack Jr. is also buried here at Holy Cross, having died in 2001. From the land of Oz, let's cross to a very different corner of American entertainment. Our next stop takes us to a man who spent 12 seasons as America's favorite TV dad, but who also played one of the coldest killers in film noir history. Fred MacMurray was the kind of actor who made everything look easy, which is probably why he was underrated for most of his career. Audiences in the 1960s knew him as Steve Douglas, the patient, pipe-smoking, widowed father on My Three Sons, one of the longest-running sitcoms of its era. It ran for 12 seasons, from 1960 to 1972. Kids of that same generation knew him as the lovably bumbling professor in The Absent-Minded Professor and its sequel Son of Flubber, two of Disney's biggest hits. But film buffs know a darker Fred MacMurray, the Walter Neff of Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, the insurance salesman seduced by Barbara Stanwyck into committing murder. That 1944 film noir is considered one of the greatest crime films ever made, and MacMurray's performance, all surface charm hiding a weak, corruptible man, was a revelation. MacMurray himself once said that Double Indemnity and The Apartment, in which he played a slimy, womanizing corporate executive, were the only two roles in his entire career that required any real acting. It was a disarming piece of self-assessment from a man who appeared in more than 100 films. Born in Kankakee, Illinois in 1908, he started out playing saxophone in dance bands and touring the country before Paramount signed him in the 1930s. He appeared in comedies, dramas, musicals, and westerns, always dependable, always professional. He was also one of the savviest businessmen in Hollywood, investing early in real estate and cattle ranching, and reportedly becoming one of the wealthiest actors of his generation. He was notoriously frugal. Colleagues joked about it, but his investments paid off handsomely. After a long battle with leukemia, MacMurray died of pneumonia on November 5, 1991, at 83. His second wife, the actress June Haver, who had once briefly entered a convent to become a nun before returning to Hollywood and marrying MacMurray, is buried alongside him. They were married for 37 years, and by all accounts, it was a happy union. From the world of television dads, let's visit a woman who was nobody's idea of domestic. A fast-talking, sharp-witted actress who blazed a trail for independent women on screen. Rosalind Russell, Roz to her friends, is remembered today for two towering performances. As Hildy Johnson in Howard Hawks' His Girl Friday, she delivered rapid-fire dialogue at a pace that left co-star Cary Grant scrambling to keep up. The film was essentially a verbal boxing match, and Russell won on points. She played the dazzling, unconventional Auntie Mame on both Broadway and screen with such exuberance that strangers called out, "Hey, Auntie Mame!" whenever they saw her on the street. The role fit her like a glove. Mame was brash, sophisticated, and utterly fearless. And so was Roz. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress 4 times, for My Sister Eileen, Sister Kenny, Morning Becomes Electra, and Auntie Mame, and never won. Not once. It remains one of the great Oscar injustices, a snub that film historians still shake their heads over. She did, however, win a Tony Award in 1953 for the musical Wonderful Town, and all 5 Golden Globes for which she was nominated. The Academy eventually gave her the Jean Herschelt Humanitarian Award in 1973, a consolation prize of sorts for a career that deserved the top honor. What made Russell unusual for her era was her insistence on playing professional women, judges, reporters, psychiatrists, teachers, at a time when most actresses were cast as wives and girlfriends waiting for their men to come home. She once remarked that being typecast as a lady was the greatest misfortune that could befall a motion picture actress, and she spent her career proving that women could be funny, smart, and commanding all at once. Born Catherine Rosalind Russell in Waterbury, Connecticut in 1907, she was one of 7 children in an Irish Catholic family. Her mother was the first woman to run for mayor of Waterbury. Her later years were marked by rheumatoid arthritis and breast cancer, both of which she faced with characteristic fortitude. She devoted her final years to fundraising for arthritis research, and a leading research center in San Francisco now bears her name. Russell died on November 28, 1976, at 69. Her husband, the producer Frederick Brisson, whom she called Freddie and whose British reserve was the perfect counterpoint to her American verve, arranged for the posthumous publication of her autobiography. Stepping across the grounds, we come to a man whose nose was as famous as his talent, and whose catchphrase closed every show. "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are." For decades, nobody knew who Mrs. Calabash was. Jimmy Durante would never say, and the mystery became one of the great running questions of American show business. The raspy-voiced comedian with the enormous nose, he called it the schnozzola, and it became his trademark, was one of the most enduring entertainers of the 20th century, spanning vaudeville, Broadway, radio, film, and television across a career that lasted more than 50 years. Durante was born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1893, the youngest of 4 children of Italian immigrants from Salerno. His father was a barber, and young Jimmy was an altar boy at the local Catholic church. He wanted to be a saloon pianist, and by the age of 17 he was playing ragtime in the honky-tonks of Coney Island. He teamed up with Lou Clayton and Eddie Jackson to form a vaudeville trio, and in 1923 the 3 of them opened Club Durant, named for Jimmy of course, in New York City. The act was a hit, and by 1930 Durante had gone solo, though he never forgot his partners. He reportedly vowed that if any one of them made it big, he'd look after the others, and he kept that promise until Clayton died in 1950. Even after that, Durante regularly brought Eddie Jackson on stage during his television specials, letting the old man strut and sing a bit, not because he needed him, but because friendship meant something. Durante moved to Hollywood and made more than 40 films for MGM, while continuing to dominate radio and nightclubs. He could mangle the English language in ways that were somehow both ridiculous and poetic. His signature songs, Inka Dinka Doo and Make Someone Happy, became standards. And if you have children or grandchildren, you've heard his voice more recently than you might think. Durante narrated the 1969 animated television special Frosty the Snowman, a Christmas classic that has aired every year since. He closed every performance by walking away into a series of spotlights, each one dimming as he passed through it, delivering that mysterious sign-off about Mrs. Calabash. The most widely accepted explanation is that Mrs. Calabash was a pet name for his first wife, Jean Olson, who died of a heart ailment on Valentine's Day in 1943. Calabash may have been Durante's characteristic mangling of Calabasas, the Southern California town where Jean spent her final years. Another theory holds that it referred to a restaurant owner in Calabash, North Carolina, who so impressed Durante with her hospitality that he promised to make her famous. He never confirmed either story. The mystery was part of the act and part of the man. After Jean's death, Durante carried on for 16 years before marrying again. His second wife, Margie Little, had been a hat check girl at the Copacabana. They courted for 16 years before marrying on Christmas Day in 1960, when she was 39 and he was 67. They adopted a daughter, Cecilia Alicia, on Christmas Day the following year, and Durante doted on Cece until his final days. He suffered a stroke in 1972 and spent his last years in declining health at his home in Santa Monica. He died of pneumonia on January 29, 1980, at 86. From the world of comedy, let's turn our attention to one of the most radiant leading ladies of Hollywood's golden age. A woman who won an Academy Award, raised 3 sisters in the business, and carried a secret that wasn't revealed until after her death. Loretta Young was a star at 14 and an icon by 20. Born Gretchen Young in Salt Lake City in 1913, she was raised in Los Angeles by her mother after her parents separated. The family was poor, and the girls, Loretta and her 3 sisters, began appearing in films as child extras to bring in money. By the early 1930s, Loretta was one of the most in-demand leading ladies in Hollywood, working opposite Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, and Cary Grant. She was strikingly beautiful, deeply disciplined, and fiercely protective of her image. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Farmer's Daughter in 1947, playing a Swedish farm girl who runs for Congress, a performance that surprised many critics who had underestimated her range. In 1953, she made a brilliant transition to television with The Loretta Young Show, entering through a doorway in a stunning gown each week in one of TV's first iconic introductions. That entrance, a swirl of fabric and a radiant smile, became the image audiences associated with her above all else. She won 3 Emmy Awards for that series and became one of the first movie stars to prove that the transition to television could be done with elegance. Young was deeply Catholic and brought that faith to her public and private life. She famously kept a swear jar on set, fining any cast or crew member who cursed in her presence. The secret she kept for decades involved a daughter, Judy Lewis, born in 1935, who was widely rumored to be the child of an affair between Young and Clark Gable during the filming of The Call of the Wild. Young maintained the fiction that Judy was adopted until very late in life. The full truth was acknowledged only after Young's death, and Judy Lewis wrote a memoir about growing up as the secret daughter of 2 of Hollywood's biggest stars. Loretta's 2 sisters, Polly Ann Young and Georgiana Young, are also buried here at Holy Cross. Loretta Young died of ovarian cancer on August 12, 2000, at 87. Let us make our way to another part of the grounds, where a very different kind of actress is buried, one who was as famous for her scandals as for her talent. Mary Astor had one of the longest careers in Hollywood. She made her first film in 1921 and her last in 1965. But for a stretch in the 1930s, she was more famous for her diary than for any role she played. During a bitter custody battle with her second husband, her private diary was introduced as evidence. It contained extraordinarily candid accounts of her love affairs, described in language that was blunt even by modern standards. The resulting trial was a national sensation. Remarkably, Astor's career not only survived the scandal, but flourished afterward. She won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for The Great Lie in 1941, and that same year delivered a knockout performance as the scheming Bridget O'Shaughnessy in The Maltese Falcon, holding her own opposite Humphrey Bogart. Born Lucille Vasconcelos Langhanka in Quincy, Illinois, in 1906, she had been pushed into acting as a teenager by a domineering father who controlled every aspect of her life and took all of her earnings. Her personal life was turbulent. 4 marriages, struggles with alcohol, but her talent was undeniable. She wrote a well-regarded autobiography and a popular novel before retiring from public life. Astor died of a pulmonary embolism on September 25, 1987, at 81. From the world of actresses and their diaries, let's walk across the grounds to a man who directed more classic films than almost anyone in the history of the medium. John Ford won 6 Academy Awards, 4 for Best Director, a record that has never been broken, plus 2 more for wartime documentaries. The Informer, The Grapes of Wrath, How Green Was My Valley, The Quiet Man. Each one earned him the directing Oscar. And those don't even include the films many critics consider his greatest work. Stagecoach, which made John Wayne a star in 1939. The Searchers, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and My Darling Clementine. Ford was born Sean Aloysius O'Feeney in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, in 1894. Though he later claimed to have been born a year later, part of the personal mythology he cultivated throughout his life. He was the son of Irish immigrants from County Galway, and his sense of Irishness ran bone deep. His older brother Francis had already made a name for himself as an actor and director in the early days of Hollywood. And in 1914, young John followed him to California. Asked years later by the French critic Jean-Luc Godard what had brought him to Hollywood, Ford replied simply, "A train." He began as a laborer, a prop man, a stuntman, whatever his brother needed, and worked his way up to directing. By the end of the silent era, he had directed more than 60 films. Ford was famously difficult, gruff, demanding, and sometimes cruel to the actors he loved most. He wore an eye patch, chewed on a handkerchief while directing, and ran his sets like a benevolent tyrant. But his films had a visual poetry and emotional depth that no one else could match. He could break your heart with a landscape. Ford served in the Navy during the Second World War, filming combat documentaries under fire. His Oscar-winning The Battle of Midway was shot during the actual battle, and Ford was wounded by shrapnel while filming. He held the rank of Rear Admiral in the United States Navy Reserve by the time of his retirement. His brother Francis Ford, who had helped launch his career in the silent days, is also buried here at Holy Cross. John Ford died of stomach cancer on August 31, 1973, at 79. He had spent his final months at his home in Palm Desert, a long way from the Monument Valley landscapes he had made famous. From behind the camera, let's return to those who stood in front of it, and to the woman who decided what audiences thought about all of them. Louella Parsons was, for 3 decades, the most powerful gossip columnist in Hollywood. From her perch at the Hearst newspaper syndicate, her column was read by an estimated 40 million people, and she could make or break a career with a single sentence. Stars courted her, feared her, and despised her in roughly equal measure. Born in Freeport, Illinois, in 1881, she began as a newspaper reporter and movie critic before William Randolph Hearst hired her in the 1920s. Her rivalry with fellow columnist Hedda Hopper became the stuff of Hollywood legend. The two women circled each other for years like prize-fighters, each trying to land the bigger scoop. Parsons was neither subtle nor particularly elegant in her prose, but she was relentless. She had sources in every studio, every restaurant, every bedroom in town. By the 1960s, her influence had waned. Television was changing how Hollywood communicated, and her health declined. Parsons died on December 9, 1972, at 91, having outlived most of the stars whose secrets she had traded in for decades. Let's leave the gossip behind and head to a different part of the grounds, where one of the most controversial figures in American sports history is buried. To a generation of Brooklyn Dodgers fans, Walter O'Malley was a villain on the order of history's greatest monsters. 2 New York newspaper columnists, Jack Newfield and Pete Hamill, once famously ranked him behind only Hitler and Stalin on their list of the worst human beings who ever lived. His crime? In 1958, O'Malley moved the Dodgers from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, ripping the heart out of a borough that had built its entire identity around the team. Ebbets Field, the beloved ballpark where Jackie Robinson broke the color line in 1947, was demolished and replaced with a housing project. After O'Malley's death, his effigies were burned in the streets of Flatbush. The full story, as always, is more complicated. O'Malley had spent years trying to build a new stadium in Brooklyn, envisioning a domed structure near the Long Island Railroad terminal at Atlantic Avenue. Robert Moses, the powerful New York City Parks Commissioner who had reshaped the city to his own vision, blocked him at every turn, insisting the Dodgers relocate to a site in Flushing Meadows, Queens, the same site where the Mets would eventually play. When Los Angeles offered land in Chavez Ravine and the freedom to build on his own terms, O'Malley took the deal. He also persuaded the Giants' owner, Horace Stoneham, to bring his team west to San Francisco, ensuring that the Dodgers wouldn't be the only major league team on the Pacific Coast. The move brought Major League Baseball to the West Coast for the first time and transformed the Dodgers into one of the most successful and profitable franchises in all of professional sports. O'Malley also built Dodger Stadium, one of the few privately financed ballparks in the country, and kept the same core team in place for decades: manager Walter Alston, general manager Buzzy Bavasi, and the incomparable broadcaster Vin Scully. During O'Malley's ownership, the Dodgers won 4 World Series titles. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2008. O'Malley died of congestive heart failure on August 9, 1979, at 75, at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He had been under treatment for cancer. Brooklyn never forgave him, from the diamond to the gridiron. Our next stop is one of the newest additions to Holy Cross, a man whose ferocity on the football field set a standard that has never truly been matched. Dick Butkus was the middle linebacker against whom all other middle linebackers have been measured, and none of them have quite measured up. Born on December 9, 1942, on the south side of Chicago, the youngest of 8 children in a Lithuanian-American family, Butkus was a hometown hero who never left. He played his high school ball at Chicago Vocational, starred at the University of Illinois, and then spent 9 legendary seasons with the Chicago Bears. Sports Illustrated put his sneering face on the cover of its 1970 NFL preview under the headline, "The Most Feared Man in the Game," and opposing players would have told you that was an understatement. He was a first-team All-Pro 5 times, a Pro Bowler 8 times, and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1979, his first year of eligibility. A knee injury forced him out at 31, and he transitioned to acting, appearing in films and television with the same blunt charm he'd brought to the field. The Dick Butkus Award, given annually to the nation's best collegiate linebacker, bears his name. Butkus died in his sleep at his home in Malibu, California, on October 5, 2023, at 80. His cause of death was a stroke. Let's shift gears entirely now and visit a man whose world was about as far from football as you could get. A world of champagne bubbles, accordion music, and the phrase, "Ah 1 and Ah 2. Lawrence Welk was born on a farm near Strasburg, North Dakota, in 1903 to German-Russian immigrant parents who spoke little English at home. He didn't learn English himself until he was 21. He taught himself the accordion as a boy, practicing in the barn between chores, and struck a deal with his father. He would work the farm until he turned 21, and in exchange his father would buy him a $400 mail-order accordion. The day he turned 21, Welk picked up that accordion and left the farm forever. By the 1920s, he was leading a dance band across the Midwest, playing ballrooms and county fairs, slowly building a following. In 1955, ABC gave him a television show, and The Lawrence Welk Show became one of the most successful programs in broadcast history, running for 31 seasons. 16 on the network, and 15 more in first-run syndication after ABC canceled it, a move the network later acknowledged as a mistake. The show was relentlessly wholesome. Welk called his style champagne music with plenty of bubbles, and it was a Saturday night ritual for millions of American families. Critics sneered, sophisticates rolled their eyes, but audiences loved it, and the ratings never lied. Welk was a shrewd businessman who owned a significant amount of real estate, including property in Escondido, California, and Santa Monica. He maintained complete control over his show and demanded discipline from his performers. Those who didn't meet his standards, or who made choices he disapproved of, sometimes found themselves on the outs. He once fired a singer, allegedly because she had shown too much knee on camera. But for his vast and loyal audience, Saturday Night without Lawrence Welk was no Saturday night at all. His theme song, Bubbles in the Wine, and that distinctive accent a blend of German and Midwestern that was entirely his own, became part of the American cultural landscape. Welk died of pneumonia on May 17, 1992, at 89. From the wholesome sounds of champagne music, let's walk to a very different kind of performer, the master of musical mayhem. Spike Jonze made his living destroying music, and people loved him for it. Born Lindley Armstrong Jones in Long Beach, California, in 1911, he was a skilled drummer who discovered that he had a gift for parody. His band, the City Slickers, took popular songs and demolished them with cowbells, gunshots, car horns, and every imaginable noisemaker. Their version of Der Führer's Face, a musical raspberry aimed directly at Adolf Hitler, became one of the best-selling novelty records of the Second World War. Jones performed in suits and zany costumes, and his live shows were anarchic spectacles of slapstick and noise. Beneath the chaos, though, Jones was a precise musician. It takes real skill to be that perfectly off-key. His humor was a product of the wartime era, when Americans needed to laugh, and his style influenced everyone from Weird Al Yankovic to the Muppets. Jones suffered from emphysema in his later years and died on May 1, 1965, at 53. Nearby rests a voice that was the opposite of Spike Jonze's, pure, controlled, and achingly beautiful. Jo Stafford had one of the most technically perfect voices in the history of popular music. She could sing anything: pop standards, folk songs, big band numbers, novelty tunes, and she hit every note dead center. Her 1952 recording of You Belong to Me reached number 1 on the charts, and she had a string of hits throughout the 1940s and 1950s, including Candy and a duet with Gordon MacRae on Whispering Hope. She was a regular on radio, appearing with Johnny Mercer and on her own programs, and she became one of the first stars to embrace the new medium of television. Here's a detail that might surprise you. Stafford and her husband, the arranger and bandleader Paul Weston, who is also buried here at Holy Cross, created a comedy act under the names Jonathan and Darlene Edwards, in which they performed deliberately terrible versions of popular songs. The album Jonathan and Darlene Edwards in Paris won the Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album in 1960. Stafford was so good that she could be hilariously bad on purpose, and audiences couldn't get enough of it. Stafford retired from performing in the 1960s and lived a quiet life in Century City. She died on July 16, 2008, at 90 from congestive heart failure. Let's leave music behind for the moment and visit someone who brought joy to millions of children without ever appearing on screen, at least not as himself. If you grew up watching Hanna-Barbera cartoons in the 1950s and 1960s, you know Daws Butler's voice, even if you never knew his name. He was Yogi Bear. He was Huckleberry Hound. He was Quick Draw McGraw, Snagglepuss, Elroy Jetson, and dozens of other characters that populated the Saturday morning landscape. Butler was a voice-acting genius who could create a fully realized character with nothing but his vocal cords. He also mentored a young generation of voice actors, including Nancy Cartwright, who went on to voice Bart Simpson. Butler worked tirelessly and mostly anonymously for decades. The voices were famous, but the man behind them was not. Born Charles Dawson Butler in Toledo, Ohio, in 1916, he served in the Navy during the Second World War before finding his calling in the emerging world of television animation. He died of a heart attack on May 18, 1988, at 71. Whenever you hear someone say, "Hey boo-boo," or "exit stage left," you're hearing Daws Butler. From the voice of Yogi Bear, let's make our way to the original voice of Goofy. Pinto Colvig, yes, that was his real nickname, earned because of his childhood resemblance to a pinto pony, was Walt Disney's go-to voice man in the early days of animation. Born Vance DeBar Colvig in Jacksonville, Oregon, in 1892, he had led one of the most colorful lives in show business before he ever stepped in front of a microphone. He was a circus clown, a vaudeville comedian, a newspaper cartoonist, and a musician who played the clarinet and ukulele. He worked as an animator and gag writer before Disney realized that the man behind the drawing board had one of the most versatile voices in the building. Colvig created the voice of Goofy in 1932. that distinctive, warm-hearted holler, and continued voicing the character off and on for decades. He also provided the voices of both Grumpy and Sleepy in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, bringing two of the seven dwarfs to life with nothing but his vocal cords. Outside of Disney, Culvig left another lasting mark on American childhood. He was the original Bozo the Clown, creating the character for the first Capitol Records Bozo story albums in the late 1940s. He designed Bozo's look, performed the voice, and established the personality that dozens of other performers would later inherit when Bozo became a franchise. The man who gave us Goofy and Bozo was a one-man entertainment factory whose voices are still echoing through living rooms 8 decades later. Culvig died on October 3, 1967, at 75. Staying in the world of entertainment, but shifting to a very different register, let's visit an actress whose life reads like the plot of a novel she might have starred in. Jackie Coogan was the first major child star in movie history. Charlie Chaplin spotted the boy, just 4 years old, doing the shimmy dance on stage at the Orpheum Theater in Los Angeles, and was captivated by his expressive face and natural gift for mimicry. Chaplin cast him in a small role in A Day's Pleasure in 1919, and then gave him the lead in The Kid in 1921, where Coogan played the abandoned child raised by Chaplin's beloved tramp character. The film was an enormous hit, and young Jackie became an international celebrity, honored by presidents and popes during a European tour. By the mid-1920s, he was earning $22,000 a week and an estimated $3 to $4 million before he turned 18, a staggering fortune for that era. He was also one of the first child stars to be heavily merchandised. Peanut butter, dolls, stationery, whistles, and figurines all bore the Coogan name. But when he came of age and asked for his money, he discovered that his mother and stepfather had spent virtually all of it on furs, jewelry, and expensive living. The resulting lawsuit was a national scandal. By the time the case was settled, only a fraction of the fortune remained. But the case had consequences far beyond one family. It led to the passage of the California Child Actors Bill in 1939, often called the Coogan Law, which for the first time required that a portion of a child performer's earnings be set aside in a trust that parents could not touch. Every child actor who has worked in California since, from Shirley Temple to the kids on modern television, owes something to Jackie Coogan's misfortune. Coogan's adult acting career never reached the heights of his childhood fame. He served as a glider pilot during the Second World War, flying missions in Burma, and returned to Hollywood to find the offers thin. But he found a new generation of fans in the 1960s as Uncle Fester on The Addams Family, a role he played with bald-headed, bug-eyed glee, a far cry from the angelic child who had stolen the world's heart 4 decades earlier. He had been married 4 times, including a brief marriage to Betty Grable. Coogan died of heart failure on March 1, 1984, at 69. Our tour now takes us to one of the great romances of old Hollywood, and one of its saddest endings. Charles Boyer was the epitome of the suave continental lover, the man every American woman in the 1930s and 1940s imagined when she heard a French accent. Born in Figeac, in the south of France in 1899, he studied philosophy at the Sorbonne before turning to the stage and then to film. Hollywood seized upon his dark eyes, his rich accented voice, and his melancholy charm, and he became one of the leading romantic stars of his era. He starred in Algiers, the film that gave rise to the oft misquoted line, "Come with me to the Casbah," which Boyer never actually said, in Love Affair, and most memorably in Gaslight, the 1944 thriller in which he systematically tried to drive Ingrid Bergman's character insane. That performance was so influential that the term gaslighting entered the English language, and it remains in common use today. He received 4 Academy Award nominations for Best Actor and was given an honorary Oscar in 1943 for his cultural contributions to the industry. What set Boyer apart from other romantic leads was his intelligence. He was one of the few European stars who successfully transitioned between French and American cinema, and he continued to do meaningful work on stage and screen into the 1970s. In 1934, Boyer married the British actress Pat Patterson, and their marriage, rare for Hollywood, lasted 44 years. Friends describe them as one of the great love stories of their generation, two people who were simply incomplete without each other. Their only child, Michael, took his own life in 1965 at the age of 21, playing Russian roulette. The loss nearly destroyed both parents. When Pat died of cancer on August 24, 1978, Boyer could not face life without her. 2 days later, and 2 days before his 79th birthday, he ended his own life with an overdose of barbiturates. He is buried here at Holy Cross beside Pat and Michael, 3 members of a family reunited in death. It is one of the saddest stories in this cemetery, and one of the most human. After that somber story, let's move to a brighter corner of the cemetery and a voice that could shake the rafters. Mario Lanza possessed what many considered the greatest natural tenor voice since Enrico Caruso, and in fact he played Caruso in the 1951 film The Great Caruso, a box office smash that made opera accessible to mainstream audiences in a way it had never been before. Born Alfredo Arnold Cocozza in South Philadelphia in 1921, the son of Italian immigrants, he was exposed to opera from childhood. His mother sang arias around the house, and young Freddie, as the family called him, was mesmerized. By 16, his vocal talent was already extraordinary, and the legendary conductor Serge Koussevitzky gave him a full scholarship to the Berkshire Music Festival at Tanglewood, reportedly telling colleagues that he had discovered the greatest voice in the world. Lanza took his stage name from the masculine form of his mother's maiden name, Maria Lanza. After service in the Army during the Second World War, where he performed in the show On the Beam alongside a young Frank Sinatra, a triumphant performance at the Hollywood Bowl in 1947 led MGM to offer him a 7-year contract. Lanza became a genuine movie star, and for a brief, brilliant moment it seemed as though he might bridge the gap between Hollywood and the opera house. His recordings sold in the millions, and songs like Be My Love and Because You're Mine became pop hits. But the film career that brought him wealth and fame also consumed the time he needed to pursue a serious operatic career. His personal demons, binge eating followed by crash dieting, heavy drinking, and volcanic clashes with directors and producers, undermined him at every turn. During the filming of The Student Prince in 1952, he had a falling out with the studio and was fired from the picture, though MGM kept his voice. Another actor lip-synced to Lanza's vocals in the finished film, a surreal arrangement that speaks to the power of that tenor. He moved his family to Rome in the late 1950s, hoping to rebuild his life and finally establish himself as a serious opera singer. He had agreed to open the 1960-61 season at the Rome Opera as Canio in Pagliacci, one of the great tenor roles. He never got the chance. On October 7, 1959, Lanza died of a pulmonary embolism in Rome at 38. His wife, Betty, devastated by his death, died 5 months later. Lanza's body was brought back to the United States and buried here at Holy Cross. In Philadelphia, a museum and park honor his memory, and his recordings continue to inspire young tenors around the world who hear that voice and wonder what might have been. From the heights of opera, let us come down to earth, literally, and visit a man who helped invent the art of slapstick comedy. Mack Sennett is sometimes called the King of Comedy, and the title is not mere flattery. Born Michael Sinnott in Richmond, Quebec, Canada, in 1880, he moved to the United States as a young man and became a founding figure of American film comedy. In 1912, he established Keystone Studios in the Edendale neighborhood of Los Angeles, and it became a factory of laughs, chaotic, innovative, and wildly productive. He created the Keystone Cops, those wildly incompetent policemen who would pile into overloaded cars and leave them destroyed while they contributed to the mess they were sent to stop. He introduced the Bathing Beauties, and he launched careers that would shape comedy for the next 100 years. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, W.C. Fields, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, Harry Langdon, Gloria Swanson, and Bing Crosby, who rests just a few hundred yards from Sennett in this very cemetery. all passed through his studio doors. Sennett's great love was the actress and comedienne Mabel Normand, who was his leading lady, his collaborator, and his companion for years. Their tumultuous relationship, passionate, creative, and ultimately heartbreaking, became the subject of the 1974 Broadway musical Mac and Mabel. Normand was the unquestioned female star of Keystone, and Chaplin himself later acknowledged that he learned much of his basic film craft from her. Important directors including Frank Capra and George Stevens also got their start under Sennett's tutelage. Sennett's philosophy was simple. He once told Chaplin, "We have no scenario. We get an idea, then follow the natural sequence of events until it leads up to a chase, which is the essence of our comedy." He also had an eye for real estate. He headed the investment company behind the Hollywoodland housing development, which built the famous Hollywood sign on Mount Lee in 1923, tying him forever to the industry's most recognizable symbol. He won an honorary Academy Award in 1938 for his contribution to the comedy technique of the screen. By the time sound arrived, Sennett's style of comedy was evolving, and his later career was less distinguished. He spent his final years in relative obscurity, a king without a kingdom. Sennett died on November 5, 1960, at 80. From the father of slapstick, let's walk to a woman who was one of the great hoofers of American cinema. Ann Miller could tap dance faster than almost anyone alive. She claimed 500 taps per minute, and one wartime measurement reportedly clocked her even higher. What makes that all the more remarkable is how she started. Born Johnny Lucille Collier in Chireno, Texas in 1923, named Johnny because her father wanted a son, she began taking dance lessons at 5 to strengthen legs weakened by rickets. Ballet bored her, but the rhythms of tap set her on fire. By 8, she had met Bill Bojangles Robinson backstage at a Houston theater, where he invited her to dance alongside him and told her she had talent. By 13, she was performing at San Francisco nightclubs, where she caught the eye of Lucille Ball, who helped her break into Hollywood. She lied about her age to get work and was dancing in movies at RKO by 14. Miller became a star at RKO and then moved to MGM for the golden age of the movie musical, where she exploded across the screen in Easter Parade opposite Fred Astaire, On the Town with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra, and Kiss Me Kate, where her Too Darn Hot number remains one of the most electrifying dance sequences ever filmed. Her long legs, her dark hair, and her machine gun footwork made her unforgettable. In 1979, she staged a major comeback on Broadway in Sugar Babies, opposite Mickey Rooney, another former MGM star, and proved she hadn't lost a step. Miller died of lung cancer on January 22, 2004, at 80. A few pathways over, we find the resting place of a woman who spent decades as the most familiar face in America's living room, even if you didn't know her name. Audrey Meadows was Alice Cramden, the sharp-tongued, long-suffering wife of Ralph on the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason's classic sitcom about a bus driver and his neighbors in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. Meadows almost didn't get the role. Gleason initially told her she was too pretty to play a working-class housewife. So she went home, put on no makeup, wore a frumpy house dress, and had photos taken that she sent to Gleason. He hired her on the spot. That determination was typical of Meadows, who was born Audrey Cotter in Wuchang, China in 1922, the daughter of missionary parents. Her older sister, Jane Meadows, was also a well-known actress. Audrey won an Emmy Award for The Honeymooners in 1955. In later life, she married Robert Six, the longtime CEO of Continental Airlines, and became a savvy businesswoman in her own right. Meadows died of lung cancer on February 3, 1996, at 73. Heading in a different direction across the grounds, let's visit a man who was Hollywood's favorite Irishman for the better part of 3 decades. Pat O'Brien made a career out of playing priests, cops, soldiers, and coaches with a fast-talking Irish bravado that audiences ate up. He's best remembered for 2 roles: Father Jerry Connolly in Angels with Dirty Faces, the 1938 gangster classic in which he squared off against James Cagney, and Knute Rockne in Knute Rockne All-American, the 1940 football picture that gave Ronald Reagan his most famous line as George Gipp, "Win one for the Gipper." O'Brien and Cagney were real-life friends who had grown up together in New York, and their on-screen chemistry was genuine. They played rivals, partners, and friends across half a dozen films, always crackling with an energy that couldn't be faked. In Angels with Dirty Faces, the tension between the priest who went straight and the gangster who didn't gives the film its moral backbone, and the final scene, in which Cagney's character walks to the electric chair, remains one of the most debated endings in Hollywood history. O'Brien appeared in more than 100 films, mostly at Warner Brothers, and was a reliable presence through the 1960s. Born William Joseph Patrick O'Brien in Milwaukee in 1899, he had studied for the priesthood before turning to acting, which gave his many screen priests a believability that other actors couldn't match. He died of heart failure on October 15, 1983, at 83. Let's take a different path now and visit someone whose fame predated Hollywood itself. A woman whose face launched a murder trial that transfixed the nation at the turn of the century. Evelyn Nesbit was called the first supermodel, though the term didn't exist yet. Born Florence Evelyn Nesbit in a small town in Pennsylvania in 1884, she moved to New York as a teenager after her father died and the family fell into poverty. Her mother brought her to artists' studios, and her face, delicate, wistful, with an abundance of copper hair, became the most sought after in the city. She appeared on magazine covers, in paintings, and in the famous Gibson Girl illustrations by Charles Dana Gibson. She modeled for some of the most prominent artists of the day and became a chorus girl in the popular show Florodora. She was 16 years old, and every powerful man in New York seemed to notice her at once. She was also at the center of one of the most sensational crimes of the early 20th century. The architect Stanford White, one of the most celebrated designers of the Gilded Age. He had designed the Washington Square Arch, the original Madison Square Garden, and the Rosario Chapel at Newport, had begun a relationship with Nesbit when she was 16. In 1906, her husband, the millionaire Harry Kendall Thaw, shot and killed White at the rooftop theater of Madison Square Garden, a building White himself had designed. Thaw fired 3 shots at point-blank range, in front of a theater full of witnesses. He then held the pistol aloft and declared that White had ruined his wife. The ensuing trials, there were 2 after the first ended in a hung jury, were front-page news for years and are often called the first trial of the century. Nesbit was the star witness, and her testimony about her relationship with White was both harrowing and riveting. Thaw was eventually found not guilty by reason of insanity and confined to a state hospital. Nesbit's later life was a long, slow decline through vaudeville, failed businesses, morphine addiction, and obscurity. She eventually settled in the Los Angeles area, far from the glittering world that had both illuminated and consumed her youth. Nesbit died on January 17, 1967, at 82. She is buried here at Holy Cross. From the Gilded Age, let's jump forward to the post-war era and the world of rock and roll, specifically to a one-hit wonder whose hit was anything but minor. Bobby Day had a song so catchy that you're probably humming it right now, even before I tell you what it is. Rockin' Robin, that bouncy, irresistible ode to a bird who could outswing any nightingale, reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1958, and has been stuck in the collective American consciousness ever since. Michael Jackson covered it in 1972, and it climbed to number 2 all over again. Born Robert James Byrd in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1928, Day was also a songwriter and producer who co-wrote Little Bitty Pretty One, another enduring hit for Thurston Harris. He was active in the Los Angeles rhythm and blues scene throughout the 1950s, but never matched the success of Rockin' Robin. Day died of cancer on July 15, 1990, at 61. Staying in the realm of music, let's walk to a part of the grounds where a very different kind of musician is buried, one whose life was as short and intense as a 3-chord punk song. Darby Crash was born Jan Paul Boehm in 1958 and became the frontman of the Germs, one of the founding bands of the Los Angeles punk scene in the late 1970s. The Germs' debut album, G.I., produced by Joan Jett, is considered a landmark of hardcore punk, raw, chaotic, and brimming with a nihilistic energy that made the band both thrilling and terrifying to watch. Crash was a magnetic, self-destructive performer who modeled himself on figures ranging from David Bowie to Charles Manson. On December 7, 1980, at the age of 22, Crash took his own life with a deliberate heroin overdose. His death was overshadowed the very next day by the murder of John Lennon, which dominated the news cycle and pushed Crash's passing into obscurity. He remains a cult figure in punk history, the subject of the 2007 film What We Do Is Secret, and his grave here at Holy Cross is a pilgrimage site for punk fans. That a Catholic cemetery in Culver City is the final resting place of one of LA. Punk's most anarchic spirits is one of those contradictions that Crash himself might have appreciated. From the raw edge of punk, let's cross to a smoother sound, one that helped define Motown. Mary Wilson was a founding member of the Supremes, the most successful female group of the 1960s and one of the best-selling acts of all time. Along with Diana Ross and Florence Ballard, Wilson helped create a sound that crossed racial boundaries and brought Motown to the mainstream at a time when America desperately needed music that could bring people together. Songs like Where Did Our Love Go?, Baby Love, Stop, In the Name of Love, and You Can't Hurry Love were #1 hits that defined an era. 12 chart toppers in all, a string of success that no female group has ever matched. Wilson was the quiet one, the steady presence beside the more flamboyant Ross and the troubled Ballard. When Ross left to pursue a solo career and Ballard was pushed out of the group amid personal struggles, Wilson stayed. She was the only member who remained with the Supremes from its inception as a high school singing group called the Primettes in 1959 to its final performance in 1977. She spent much of her later career advocating for artists' rights, fighting for legislation that would ensure performers received fair royalties for their work, and she wrote 2 memoirs about her time with the Supremes. The first, Dream Girl. My Life as a Supreme, was a bestseller that offered a candid look at the internal tensions that Berry Gordy's Motown machine both created and concealed. Wilson died suddenly on February 8, 2021, at 76, at her home in Henderson, Nevada, just 2 days after posting on social media about upcoming projects. Her cause of death was later determined to be hypertensive, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. She was buried here at Holy Cross. Let's continue walking and come to a figure from the world of auto racing, a man who competed at speeds that were terrifying for his era. Ralph De Palma was born in Troia, Italy, in 1882 and immigrated to the United States as a child, settling in Brooklyn. He became one of the greatest race car drivers of the early 20th century. A man who won more than 2,000 races over the course of his career, a staggering number that reflects both his extraordinary talent and the relentless racing calendar of that era. His most famous victory came at the 1915 Indianapolis 500, but the race that best defined his character happened 3 years earlier. At the 1912 Indy 500, De Palma was leading by a commanding margin when his car broke down with fewer than 2 laps to go. Rather than accept defeat, he and his riding mechanic climbed out and began pushing the car toward the finish line. They were passed by the eventual winner, Joe Dawson, but the image of De Palma pushing his broken machine became one of the most iconic in all of motorsport. A story of stubborn grace in the face of cruel luck. De Palma was inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame in 1991, long after his death. He passed away on March 31, 1956, at 73. And not far from De Palma rests another pioneer of early American auto racing. Barney Oldfield was the first man to drive a car at 60 miles per hour, a feat he accomplished in 1903 at the wheel of the 999, a racer built by a young engineer named Henry Ford. That partnership, Oldfield's driving and Ford's engineering, helped launch both of their careers. Oldfield had never driven an automobile before Ford put him behind the wheel, but he won his very first race and never looked back. He became the most famous race car driver in America, a household name in the early 1900s who barnstormed the country in exhibition races and set speed records on dirt tracks and beaches from coast to coast. He was flamboyant, cigar-chomping, and fearless. He reportedly chewed a cigar even while racing, clenching it in his teeth at 70 miles per hour, and his name became a synonym for reckless speed. "Who do you think you are, Barney Oldfield?" was a common expression hurled at anyone who drove too fast, and it persisted in American speech for decades after his racing days were over. Born near Wauseon, Ohio in 1878, Oldfield retired from racing in 1918 and spent his later years in Los Angeles, where he appeared in a few films and ran a tire company. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage on October 4, 1946, at 68. From the racetrack to the world of high society, our next stop brings us to a name that once headlined gossip columns around the globe. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, not to be confused with her more famous daughter and namesake, the fashion designer Gloria Vanderbilt, was a socialite at the center of one of the most sensational custody battles of the 1930s. Born Gloria Mercedes Morgan in 1904 in Lucerne, Switzerland, to a family of American diplomats, she married Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune, in 1923. She was 19, he was 42. When Reginald died just 2 years later, his health had been weakened by years of heavy drinking. Their daughter, little Gloria, became the subject of a bitter and public custody fight between Gloria Sr. and Reginald's sister, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, the sculptor and art patron who founded the Whitney Museum. The trial, which played out in New York Supreme Court in 1934, exposed the excesses and dysfunction of the Vanderbilt world to a fascinated public. Witnesses testified about Gloria's lifestyle, her companions, and her fitness as a mother. The press covered every detail. The court ultimately awarded primary custody to Whitney, and Gloria was allowed only weekend visits with her own child. The little girl at the center of that courtroom drama, of course, grew up to become Gloria Vanderbilt, actress, artist, author, and denim mogul, and the mother of the journalist Anderson Cooper. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt's twin sister, Thelma Furness, was herself famous as a one-time companion of the Prince of Wales. It was Thelma who introduced the prince to Wallis Simpson, inadvertently setting in motion the abdication crisis that shook the British monarchy. Thelma is also buried here at Holy Cross. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt died on February 13, 1965, at 60. Let's return to the world of entertainment and visit a woman who lit up both the Broadway stage and the television screen with her comic gifts. Nanette Fabray, born Ruby Bernadette Nanette Teresa Fabaré in San Diego in 1920, was a triple threat. She could act, sing, and dance, and she did all three with warmth and precision. She had been performing since childhood. She appeared in Our Gang comedies as a little girl, and by the time she hit Broadway, she was one of the most polished performers in the business. She won a Tony Award for the 1949 musical Love Life with music by Kurt Weill, and then conquered television when she joined the cast of Sid Caesar's Caesar's Hour, replacing Imogene Coca. On that show, she more than held her own in the company of some of the finest comedy writers in television history, including Mel Brooks, Neil Simon, and Carl Reiner. She won 3 Emmy Awards for her work on the series, a remarkable achievement in an era when variety television was the most competitive arena in entertainment. Fabray was partially deaf from a condition called otosclerosis and became one of the most prominent advocates for the hearing impaired in the entertainment industry, receiving the President's Distinguished Service Award from Lyndon Johnson in 1965. If her last name sounds familiar for another reason, it should. Her niece was Shelley Fabares, who starred on The Donna Reed Show and later on Coach, and who had a #1 hit with Johnny Angel in 1962. Talent, it seems, ran in the family. Fabray continued performing on stage, in film, and on television well into her later years. She died on February 22, 2018, at 97. Just a short distance from Fabray, we find another actress whose career began when she was still a child and who became one of the brightest young stars of the early 1940s. Joan Leslie was 17 when she danced with Fred Astaire in The Sky's the Limit and played opposite Gary Cooper in Sergeant York. the 1941 film that won Cooper the Academy Award for Best Actor. Think about that for a moment. A teenager, holding her own on screen with two of the biggest stars in Hollywood, in two of the most acclaimed films of their respective years. She also appeared in Yankee Doodle Dandy with James Cagney and in High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart, all before she turned 20. During the war years, her fresh, wholesome beauty made her the ideal leading lady for patriotic pictures, and she was one of the most popular young actresses in America. Born Joan Agnes Teresa Sadie Brodel in Detroit in 1925, she had been performing in vaudeville with her sisters since early childhood. The three Brodel girls had an act that toured the circuit when Joan was still in grade school. Her youthful freshness was no act. She really was that young. After a contract dispute with Warner Brothers in the mid-1940s, Leslie wanted better roles and more money, and the studio balked. Her career slowed considerably. The dispute effectively blacklisted her from the major studios for a critical period, and by the time it was resolved, the moment had passed. She eventually retired from acting in the late 1950s to focus on her family, and she lived a quiet, private life for decades afterward. Leslie died on October 12, 2015, at 90. Moving through the grounds, our tour brings us to a man whose voice was the first thing millions of Americans heard every day for 35 years. MacDonald Carey opened every episode of Days of Our Lives with a simple, resonant declaration. Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. He spoke those words for the first time in 1965 when the NBC soap opera premiered, and continued doing so until his death nearly 3 decades later. For millions of Americans, particularly stay-at-home viewers who tuned in every afternoon, his voice was as familiar as a neighbor's greeting. It was warm, authoritative, and comforting, and it turned a simple metaphor about time into one of the most recognized phrases in television history. But Carey's career extended far beyond Salem. He had been a stage, film, and radio actor since the 1930s, and his most notable big-screen role was in Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt in 1943, where he played a detective investigating Joseph Cotton's charming murderer in a quiet California town. Born Edward MacDonald Carey in Sioux City, Iowa in 1913, he served in the Marines during World War II before resuming his acting career. In his later years, he published several volumes of poetry, a quieter creative outlet for a man who had spent decades performing. Carey died of lung cancer on March 21, 1994, at 81, just a few weeks after John Candy. In a tribute that speaks to how perfectly his voice had merged with the show's identity, Days of Our Lives continued to use his recorded opening narration long after his passing. As of today, MacDonald Carey's voice still introduces the program, more than 30 years after his death. Let's step away from actors for a moment and visit a man whose voice echoed through a different kind of arena, the basketball court. Chick Hearn called Los Angeles Lakers games for 42 consecutive years, a streak of 3,338 consecutive broadcasts that may never be matched. Born Francis Dale Hearn in Aurora, Illinois, in 1916, he played basketball at Bradley University, where his teammates gave him a nickname that stuck for life. They hid a dead chicken in a box of sneakers, and from that day on, he was Chick. He became the voice of the Lakers in 1961, shortly after the team moved from Minneapolis to Los Angeles, and he never let go. Hearn didn't just call games. He invented the language of basketball broadcasting. Before Chick Hearn, there was no such thing as a slam dunk. The move existed, of course, but it was called a dunk shot. Hearn coined slam dunk during a Lakers broadcast in 1972, and the term entered not just the sports lexicon, but everyday English. People now use it to describe any sure thing. He also gave us air ball, finger roll, no harm, no foul, dribble drive, and picked his pocket. His rapid-fire delivery was so complete that his broadcast partners sometimes couldn't get a word in edgewise. When the Lakers had built an insurmountable lead, he would announce the game's conclusion with a string of imagery that became his most famous trademark. The game was in the refrigerator, the door was closed, the light was out, the eggs were cooling, the butter was getting hard, and the jello was jiggling. Hearn was the soundtrack to the Showtime era of Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the 1980s. And he was still calling games when Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant brought the franchise its next dynasty at the turn of the millennium. He stood at the front of the championship parade bus after the Lakers beat the Nets for the 2002 title, his hair dyed purple, his shirt drenched in champagne, 85 years old, and still the heart of the team. Less than 2 months later, he died from injuries sustained in a fall at his Encino home. The Lakers retired his microphone the way they retired jerseys, hanging it from the rafters of Staples Center. And while we're on the subject of great sports writers and broadcasters, another legendary voice from the Los Angeles sports scene rests not far away. Jim Murray was the sports columnist for the Los Angeles Times for nearly 4 decades, and he was widely regarded as the finest sports writer of his generation, or perhaps any generation. He won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 1990 and was honored 14 times by the Associated Press sports editors as America's best sports columnist. Murray's style was elegant, witty, and deceptively effortless. He could describe a golf course as looking like it was designed by a man with a 5-iron in one hand and a martini in the other, and somehow make you see the place perfectly. Born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1919, he worked for Time magazine and Sports Illustrated before the Times hired him in 1961. In the 1970s, he lost sight in one eye and then the other. A devastating blow for a writer whose work depended on observation. He continued writing, dictating his columns, and never lost his edge. Murray died of a heart attack on August 16, 1998, at 78. From the world of sports to the world of letters, let's visit a novelist whose work captured the soul of Los Angeles like few others. John Fante spent most of his career in obscurity, grinding out screenplays for Hollywood studios while writing the novels that mattered to him on the side. Born in Denver, Colorado in 1909, the son of an Italian immigrant bricklayer and a devoutly Catholic mother, he moved to Los Angeles as a young man and made the city his great subject. His 1939 novel, Ask the Dust, set in the boarding houses and cafeterias of Depression-era Bunker Hill, is now considered a masterpiece of American literature. A raw, tender, autobiographical story of a young writer named Arturo Bandini trying to make it in a city that didn't care whether he lived or died. The prose crackles with energy and longing, and anyone who has ever arrived in Los Angeles with more ambition than money will recognize the feeling instantly. Fante's work was largely forgotten for decades. He paid the bills writing screenplays, workmanlike studio jobs that kept food on the table but did nothing for his literary reputation. Then, in the 1970s, Charles Bukowski, himself a Los Angeles literary outlaw, discovered Fante's novels on a dusty library shelf and began championing them with the fervor of a man who had found a kindred spirit. Bukowski's advocacy led to the republication of Ask the Dust and Fante's other Bandini novels, and a new generation of readers discovered what had been hiding in plain sight. Fante spent his final years blind and losing limbs to diabetes, a cruel fate for a writer whose work was so vividly observed. He dictated his last novel, Dreams from Bunker Hill, to his wife Joyce, who sat beside him and typed every word. He died on May 8, 1983, at 73. Today, a square in downtown Los Angeles is named for him, and Ask the Dust is required reading for anyone who wants to understand this city, its beauty, its indifference, and its stubborn capacity to break your heart. Let's walk a bit further and visit a woman whose career took her from child actress to producer in a remarkable arc. Benita Granville earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress at the age of 13 for her portrayal of a malicious, manipulative schoolgirl in These Three, the 1936 William Wyler adaptation of Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour. It was a startling performance, this child actress playing pure cruelty with a conviction that unsettled adult audiences, and it remains one of the youngest ever nominations in that category. She was also the screen's first Nancy Drew, playing the teenage detective in a series of 4 Warner Brothers films in the late 1930s. where her quick-witted energy made the character a favorite with young audiences. Born in Chicago in 1923 and raised in Hollywood, Granville was acting in films by the age of 9. Her adult career was less prominent. The transition from child star to leading lady was as difficult then as it is now, but she made a shrewd pivot behind the camera. She married Jack Rather, a Texas oil man and media investor who is also buried here at Holy Cross, and together they became one of the wealthiest and most influential couples in Los Angeles. Granville served as associate producer on the long-running television series Lassie, which the Rathers owned, and she helped guide the show through its many seasons. It was a different kind of stardom. Not the kind that puts your face on a movie poster, but the kind that puts your name on a studio ledger, which in Hollywood often matters more. Granville died of cancer on October 11, 1988, at 65. Our tour now takes us to one of the original voices of New Orleans jazz. Kid Ory was one of the founding figures of Dixieland jazz, a trombonist and bandleader whose career stretched from the earliest days of jazz in New Orleans to the revival movement of the 1940s and well beyond. Born Edward Ory in La Place, Louisiana, in 1886, he formed his first band as a teenager using homemade instruments and eventually moved to Los Angeles in 1919, where he made what are believed to be the first jazz recordings by a black musician in the city. Over the years, he played alongside virtually every titan of early jazz. Louis Armstrong played in his band, as did King Oliver and Jelly Roll Morton. His tailgate trombone style, with its sliding, swooping, melodic lines played from the back of a flatbed truck in New Orleans parade tradition, became one of the defining sounds of traditional jazz. He composed Muskrat Ramble, which became a Dixieland standard performed by jazz bands around the world. After years of semi-retirement, he ran a chicken farm in Los Angeles during the Depression. Ory came back strong during the Dixieland revival of the 1940s, recording and performing into the 1960s with an energy that belied his age. He eventually retired to Honolulu, Hawaii, where he died on January 23, 1973, at 86. His body was brought back to Los Angeles for burial at Holy Cross. From the jazz age, let's move forward to the 1960s and a television doctor who made house calls every week. Vince Edwards was Ben Casey, the brooding, intense young neurosurgeon who became one of television's first sex symbols when the medical drama premiered on ABC in 1961. With his dark good looks and his no-nonsense approach to both medicine and romance, Edwards became a sensation, and Ben Casey was one of the most watched shows on television for 5 seasons. The show's opening credits, a hand drawing the symbols for man, woman, birth, death, and infinity on a chalkboard, became iconic. Before he was an actor, Edwards was an athlete. Born Vincent Edward Zoino in Brooklyn in 1928, the son of Italian immigrants, he had a twin brother and 6 siblings altogether. He was a champion swimmer in high school and attended Ohio State University on an athletic scholarship, where he made the national championship swimming team. The Olympics were on the horizon, but an appendectomy cut short his competitive swimming career. He pivoted to acting, studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts alongside classmates who included Grace Kelly, Anne Bancroft, and John Cassavetes. He signed with Paramount in the early 1950s and appeared in several noir films, including the underseen gem Murder by Contract, before television made him a household name. Edwards was so famous at his peak that the multi-sport athlete Bo Jackson's parents named their son Vincent Edward Jackson in his honor. After Ben Casey ended in 1966, Edwards struggled with typecasting. Audiences couldn't see past the white coat, though he continued working steadily in film and television for decades. Edwards died of pancreatic cancer on March 11, 1996, at 67. Crossing the grounds once more, we arrive at the final resting place of a singer who made his mark with a song about the heartache of lost love, and then sang it again, decades later, for a different audience entirely. Al Martino's 1952 recording of Here in My Heart was the very first #1 single on the UK singles chart when the chart launched on November 14, 1952, a distinction that gives the song a permanent place in music history, even if most Americans have forgotten it. Born Alfred Cini in a working-class Italian neighborhood of South Philadelphia in 1927, the same neighborhood that produced Mario Lanza, Eddie Fisher, Fabian, and Bobby Rydell. Martino was a bricklayer's son who sang in local clubs before winning the Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts television competition, which launched his recording career. He had a string of hits in the 1950s and 1960s, including I Love You Because and Painted, Tainted Rose, and his rich baritone placed him squarely in the Sinatra tradition of Italian-American pop crooners. But his most memorable moment may have come on screen. He played Johnny Fontane in The Godfather, the singer widely understood to be inspired in part by Frank Sinatra. The role, small but unforgettable, particularly the scene in which Fontane weeps to the dawn about a movie role, brought Martino a new wave of fame and introduced him to an audience too young to remember his chart hits. Martino continued performing live well into his 70s. He died of a heart attack on October 13, 2009, at 82. Let's visit another corner of the cemetery now, where a woman whose comedic talents deserved far more recognition than they received is buried. Zasu Pitts, yes, that was her real name, a combination of her two aunts' names, Eliza and Susan, was one of the most distinctive character actresses in Hollywood history, and her story contains one of its cruelest ironies. Born in Parsons, Kansas in 1894, she made her way to Hollywood as a young woman and was discovered by the pioneering screenwriter Frances Marion, who cast her alongside Mary Pickford. In 1924, Erich von Stroheim gave her the lead in his epic Greed, a 9-hour film cut down to 2 by the studio, in which she played Trina, a woman consumed by avarice whose obsession with gold destroys her marriage. Von Stroheim called Pitts the greatest dramatic actress based on that performance, and critics agreed. The New York Times praised her ability to make the character live. But here is where fate turned against her. By the late 1920s, Pitts had become so associated with comedic roles that when she was cast as Lew Ayres' dying mother in All Quiet on the Western Front in 1930, preview audiences burst into laughter the moment she appeared on screen. Her heart-wrenching death scene couldn't be heard over the howling. She was replaced, and her career was thereafter channeled almost exclusively into comedy. She became famous for her fluttering hands, her high-pitched voice, and her air of perpetual befuddlement, appearing in dozens of comedies and in a popular series of short films with Thelma Todd. The woman von Stroheim had considered the greatest dramatic actress of her time spent the rest of her career making people laugh, and she did it beautifully. But you have to wonder what might have been. Pitts worked right up to the end, making her final appearances in 2 1963 films, including the all-star comedy It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. She died of cancer on June 7, 1963, at 68. Our tour brings us next to a man whose Academy Award performance remains one of the most electrifying in the history of film noir. Edmund O'Brien won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for The Barefoot Contessa in 1954, playing a sweaty, anxious press agent opposite Humphrey Bogart and Ava Gardner. But his finest hour may have been DOA, the 1950 film Noir, in which he played a man who walks into a police station and announces that he wants to report a murder, his own. He's been fatally poisoned and has only hours to discover who killed him and why. It remains one of the most gripping premises in all of cinema, and O'Brien carries the entire film on his shoulders, racing through San Francisco with death ticking inside him like a clock. Born in New York City in 1915, O'Brien was a Shakespearean-trained actor who had studied with the renowned Sanford Meisner and appeared on Broadway as a teenager before heading west. He appeared in more than 100 films over 4 decades, bringing a rumpled, perspiring intensity to every role. He was the fast-talking reporter in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the treasonous colonel in 7 Days in May, for which he received a second Academy Award nomination, and the drunken, aging member of the gang in Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, one of the most violent and influential westerns ever made. O'Brien was one of those actors who could disappear into a part so completely that you forgot you were watching a performance. He suffered from Alzheimer's disease in his later years and died on May 9, 1985, at 69. Let's make our way to a part of the grounds where an unusual Hollywood couple rests together. A couple whose story intersects with one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Golden Age. Eddie Mannix was a powerful executive at MGM during the studio's golden era, a fixer, a deal-maker, and a man who knew where all of Hollywood's bodies were buried, sometimes literally. Mannix's job was to make problems disappear, whether those problems involved drunk actors, pregnant starlets, or inconvenient scandals. He was feared and respected in roughly equal measure, and for decades he was one of the most powerful men in the movie business, despite never having his name on a marquee. His wife, Toni Mannix, was a former showgirl who had carried on a long affair with George Reeves, the actor who played Superman on television in the 1950s. When Reeves died of a gunshot wound at his Benedict Canyon home on June 16, 1959, in what was officially ruled a taking of his own life, many in Hollywood suspected foul play. And the names that came up in the whispers included both Toni Mannix and Eddie Mannix himself. The circumstances were strange. There were other people in the house that night, the forensics raised questions, and Reeves had recently broken off his relationship with Toni. The full truth has never been established, and the case remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, explored in the 2006 film Hollywoodland, in which Ben Affleck played Reeves. Eddie Mannix died of cardiovascular disease in 1963 at 72. Toni Mannix died in 1983 at 77. They rest together here, their stories still tangled with questions that will probably never be answered. From the shadows of old Hollywood intrigue, let's step into the light and visit a man who directed some of the funniest and most touching films of the 1930s and 1940s. Leo McCarey won the Academy Award for Best Director twice, for The Awful Truth in 1937, a screwball comedy starring Cary Grant and Irene Dunne that set the standard for the genre, and for Going My Way in 1944, the Bing Crosby vehicle that also won Best Picture. We started our tour at Crosby's grave. It seems fitting that we end it with the man who directed him in his finest hour. McCarey was that rare director who could handle both comedy and drama with equal skill, and he seemed almost embarrassed by his versatility. When he won the Oscar for The Awful Truth, he reportedly told the audience they had given it to him for the wrong picture. He thought his other 1937 film, Make Way for Tomorrow, a devastating drama about an elderly couple separated by poverty and their children's indifference, was the better work. McCarey directed The Marx Brothers in Duck Soup, which flopped at the box office in 1933 but is now considered one of the greatest comedies ever made. He supervised Laurel and Hardy's finest short films at the Hal Roach Studios, helping to pair the two comedians and shaping the gentle, slow-burn style that became their trademark. And he made An Affair to Remember with Grant and Dunn in 1957, a romantic drama that became one of the most beloved films of its era, and which Nora Ephron later turned into a running joke in Sleepless in Seattle, where Meg Ryan and her friends weep openly while discussing it. Born in Los Angeles in 1898, McCarey was a lawyer's son who studied law himself before falling in love with filmmaking and never looking back. He began in the silent era, writing gags and directing short comedies, and worked steadily for 4 decades. His later years were less productive, his politics grew more conservative, and his health declined, but his best work remains as fresh and alive as anything in the history of American film. McCarey died of emphysema and cancer on July 5, 1969, at 70. And now, as the afternoon light begins to soften across the rolling hills of Holy Cross, we've reached the end of our walk. 50 stories, 50 lives, stretching across more than a century of American history. We visited the man who sang White Christmas and the man who wore the Dracula cape. We've stood beside the most glamorous woman of the 1940s and the most feared linebacker of the 1960s. We've met child stars and opera singers, gossip columnists and baseball executives, race car drivers and punk rockers. We've heard about marriages that lasted decades and careers that ended too soon. What's remarkable about Holy Cross is how democratic it feels. There are no towering monuments here, no ornate mausoleums competing for attention. just flat markers in the California grass, one name beside another. Bing Crosby rests the same way as a parish schoolteacher. Rita Hayworth's marker is no grander than anyone else's. The king of comedy lies near the voice of Yogi Bear, and the woman who once dazzled as a Ziegfeld girl sleeps not far from the man who moved the Dodgers to Los Angeles. In this place, the only thing that distinguishes the famous from the forgotten is the stories we carry about them, and the willingness of someone to stop and look down and remember. These 50 people came from everywhere, from Budapest and Brooklyn, from South Philadelphia and Saskatchewan, from a farm in North Dakota and a slum on the Lower East Side. They found their way to Southern California, as so many millions have, drawn by the promise of sunshine and reinvention. Some of them got everything they wanted. Some of them got more than they could handle. A few, like Charles Boyer, like Darby Crash, left this world on their own terms before they were ready. But all of them, in their way, left a mark on the culture that outlasted them. And all of them ended up here, in this quiet Catholic cemetery in Culver City, under the same mild California sky. Thank you for walking these grounds with us today. The names will stay with you. The stories, we hope, will too. This has been a tour of Holy Cross Cemetery, 200 acres of sacred ground where the stars came to rest.